Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
We're going deep today, folks. Really deep into the mind of Aristotle.
Oh, yeah, we are. But not your typical lecture on ancient philosophy, no, sir.
Not even close. We're bringing in some heavy hitters to help us out, some seriously opinionated commentators, to say the least.
Imagine Socrates, Joe Rogan, Kanye West, and Nietzsche all gathered around debating Aristotle's big ideas. Can you picture that?
Oh, it's going to get lively. I can guarantee you that. We're talking logic, politics, happiness, power, the whole Aristotelian shebang. And we'll be pulling wisdom from all the classics, Nicomachean ethics, physics, metaphysics, on the heavens, even his writings on animals and storytelling.
We're diving deep into Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics.
The OG guide to living a good life. But is it timeless wisdom?
Or just, ancient self-help.
That's what we're here to figure out,
Yeah.
right? And with Kanye claiming he's already reached peak eudaimonia, that's Aristotle's word for flourishing, by the way, and Joe Rogan, always a fan of the golden mean, chiming in.
And let's not forget Nietzsche. He's going to be stirring the pot as usual.
Oh yeah, Nietzsche will definitely keep things interesting. And of course, we've got Socrates.
Always there to question every single assumption.
Get ready to hear Aristotle like you've never heard him before, folks. We're about to unpack his ideas alongside some seriously opinionated commentators.
Should be fun.
So first up, Aristotle's view of the universe. Back then, no fancy telescopes or anything like that.
Nope, just good old-fashioned observation. So picture this. You're Aristotle, standing under the night sky, observing the stars.
Trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. Based on what he could see, he concluded that the Earth was at the center of the universe.
Makes sense, right? I mean, it does look that way.
It does, doesn't it? Everything else revolving around us in perfect circles. This is what's known as the geocentric model.
Okay, the geocentric model. Got it. But didn't Aristotle also, provide evidence that the Earth was a sphere?
He did. This is where it gets really interesting. He observed lunar eclipses, when the Earth casts a shadow on the moon?
Right.
And he noticed that the shadow's edge was always curved.
So that means...
You couldn't be flat.
Pretty clever deduction for someone living over 2,000 years ago. But I can already hear Socrates jumping in, can't you?
Oh, absolutely.
With his signature question.
Hold on, he'd say.
How can we be sure the Earth is at the center?
What proof does Aristotle offer?
Could there be another explanation?
Classic Socrates, always pushing us to think deeper.
Always. And I bet Aristotle's concept of a finite universe would really get the debate going.
Oh, for sure. He was fascinated by limits and boundaries, you see, and he applied this thinking to the universe.
A finite universe. That's a mind-blowing concept.
Especially today, when we think of the universe as this vast, ever-expanding space.
All right, so we've explored the structure of Aristotle's universe. Let's zoom in a bit now and talk about what he believed were the building blocks of reality.
Okay, so Aristotle believed that everything in the physical world was made up of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
The 4 elements, huh? It's funny how those ideas still kind of stick with us, even today.
They really do. We talk about people having, fiery personalities.
Not being down to earth.
Exactly. Even though we know scientifically those aren't the true building blocks of matter.
Right, right.
But for Aristotle, these elements weren't just abstract concepts. He saw them as the literal ingredients that made up everything around us.
Wow, he took it literally.
Oh, yeah. What's even more fascinating is that he believed fire goes upwards because it contains void.
Void.
Almost like a pre-modern concept of density and buoyancy.
Whoa, that's pretty ahead of his time. I bet Kanye would have a field day with this.
Oh, absolutely. He's always talking about fire and pushing boundaries.
Right. He'd probably say something like, I'm all about that fire element, constantly striving upwards.
Achieving eudaimonia through my creative expression.
That's so Kanye.
Totally.
Okay, speaking of pushing boundaries, let's move on to Aristotle's work on biology.
All right, biology.
This guy spent years meticulously observing and classifying animals, right? Dissecting them, describing their anatomy in detail.
All without the aid of modern tools like microscopes.
Crazy.
You have to remember, this was long before DNA analysis and sophisticated imaging techniques.
He was a true pioneer.
Oh yeah, Aristotle was a pioneer of zoology, paving the way for our understanding of the diversity of life.
He documented everything, like the intricate gills of crawfish.
Peculiar tongues of frogs, you name it.
Talk about attention to detail.
It makes you realize how much we take for granted today with all our fancy technology, right?
Totally. I bet Joe Rogan would be fascinated by all
Oh,
this,
yeah, I can just picture him now.
leaning back in his chair.
Saying Aristotle was way ahead of his time, man. He was like the original explorer, observing all these crazy animals with his own two eyes.
So true.
Okay.
Okay, now let's shift gears and dive into On the Soul,
On the soul.
where Aristotle explores what it means to be alive and have a soul.
All right, let's talk about the soul. But we need to be careful here because when Aristotle says soul, it's not exactly what we might think of today.
Oh, how so?
For him, the soul wasn't just some ethereal spiritual thing. It was the principle of life itself, responsible for movement, sensation, and thought.
So it's what makes living things, well, living.
Exactly. It's what animated living beings and differentiated them from inanimate objects.
So the soul was more like a life force than a separate entity.
Precisely. He saw it as an integral part of a living being.
Interesting. And didn't he have different types of souls?
He did. Aristotle categorized souls as nutritive, sensitive, and rational. Plants have nutritive souls.
Okay, nutritive souls.
Responsible for growth and reproduction, animals have sensitive souls,
Sensitive soul.
giving them the ability to perceive and react to the world around them.
Makes sense.
And then, of course, humans have the rational soul,
The rational soul.
capable of reason and complex thought.
Right, so that's what sets us apart, according to Aristotle. But you know who I think we need to bring in here?
Who's that?
Nietzsche. I have the feeling he might have some objections to Aristotle's, neat and tidy categories.
Oh, Nietzsche will definitely shake things up. He's all about embracing the wildness of human nature, our drives and passions.
Exactly. He'd probably argue that Aristotle is too focused on reason and control.
He might say something like, Aristotle is all about logic and restraint, but life is about embracing chaos.
Becoming the Übermensch, the one who transcends limitations and creates their own values.
There you go, always challenging the status quo.
Which is exactly what makes exploring Aristotle so much fun.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Aristotle. Last time, we traveled through his universe model, explored the building blocks of reality, and even dissected his fascinating take on the soul.
We heard Kanye embracing his inner fire, Joe Rogan geeking out about ancient animal encounters, and Nietzsche, reminding us to shake things up a bit.
Always good to have Nietzsche around.
Oh yeah, for sure. But now let's circle back to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, where he lays out his vision for a good life.
The good life. Who doesn't want that? You've probably heard of Aristotle's famous concept of the golden mean.
The golden mean, yeah. This idea of finding balance between extremes.
Right. It sounds simple enough on the surface.
But I bet it's trickier than it seems. So what did Aristotle actually mean by the golden mean?
Okay, so imagine a spectrum with two extremes on either end.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
For example, courage. Courage is the golden mean between cowardice on one end and recklessness on the other.
I see.
Generosity lies between stinginess and extravagance.
So it's about navigating those extremes.
To find that sweet spot in the middle.
The golden mean.
Exactly. And for Aristotle, cultivating these virtues, these habits of finding balance, wasn't just about being a quote-unquote good person. He believed it was the key to achieving eudaimonia. Remember that?
That flourishing, that true happiness.
Right.
So living a virtuous life isn't about deprivation or restriction.
Not at all.
It's about finding that balance.
That leads to a truly fulfilling existence.
I think this resonates with a lot of people today, don't you? We're constantly bombarded with messages about extreme diets, extreme fitness regimes, extreme political views.
It's exhausting.
It can feel like a recipe for burnout.
You hit the nail on the head, and this is where I think Joe Rogan would really connect with Aristotle's ideas.
Oh, yeah.
Joe's always talking about moderation, finding balance in all areas of life.
He is. Diet, exercise, even open-mindedness.
Exactly.
I can practically hear him saying, Aristotle was onto something with this golden mean stuff, man.
Right.
You got to avoid the extremes and find that sweet spot.
That's where the real growth happens.
Okay, so let's shift gears from personal ethics to the realm of politics.
Okay, politics.
Aristotle's politics takes a deep dive into different forms of government.
How they function, their strengths, weaknesses.
Monarchies, aristocracies, democracies, the whole shebang.
He covers it all, and this wasn't just some abstract theoretical exercise for Aristotle.
Oh, no.
He was really trying to understand the practical realities of governing societies.
Right. So he was a pragmatist.
Very much so. He wasn't interested in utopian ideals.
He wanted to see what actually worked.
Exactly. He analyzed the strengths and weaknesses of different systems, their potential for corruption, the conditions under which they thrive or fail.
It's like he was trying to create a guidebook
for effective governance.
based on observation and real-world examples.
Precisely. He recognized that different societies, with their unique histories and challenges, might require different forms of government.
Not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Definitely not. Now, I bet Socrates would have a thing or two to say about Aristotle's views on social hierarchy.
Oh, I'm sure he would.
I can almost hear Socrates now probing Aristotle with those relentless questions of his.
Go on.
He'd say something like, Aristotle, you speak of justice and the good life for citizens, but what about those excluded from your ideal society?
The women, the slaves, the laborers.
Does your concept of justice extend to them?
And if not, can it truly be called just?
Those are powerful questions. It's easy to get caught up in the intellectual brilliance of Aristotle's ideas.
Right.
But we also have to acknowledge the limitations of his time and context.
Totally. Socrates reminds us that any ethical or political system
Must be constantly scrutinized
reevaluated.
to ensure it truly serves the good of all, not just a privileged few.
Okay, how about we take a quick detour into the world of persuasion and rhetoric?
Sounds good.
Aristotle's rhetoric is like a masterclass in the art of making compelling arguments.
Absolutely. This is where he breaks down different types of rhetoric. Deliberative, used in political debates,
Forensic,
used in legal arguments,
epidictic.
the rhetoric of praise and blame, often used in speeches.
Covered all the bases.
He analyzed
The
everything.
use of logic and evidence.
Emotional appeals.
The importance of establishing credibility.
It's like a playbook for effective communication.
And remember how we talked about that ancient Greek orator, Prodicus?
Product.
He would strategically slip in a bit of a show lecture to keep his audience engaged.
Ah, yes, Prodicus. Very clever. It's like the ancient Greek version of a TED Talk.
Exactly. Aristotle clearly understood the power of storytelling,
Oh, for sure.
captivating an audience.
Even when presenting complex ideas.
Okay, which brings us to our last stop for today.
Where are we headed?
Aristotle's Poetics,
Poetics.
where he dissects the art of tragedy and
Oh, yeah.
storytelling.
Tragedy and storytelling.
Aristotle dives deep into the elements of a good tragedy.
Which are?
Plot, character, thought, diction, spectacle, and song. He even breaks down different types of plots
Oh, interesting.
and how they evoke different emotional responses in the audience.
Makes sense. Didn't he have some fascinating idea about the best rhythm for prose?
He did. Aristotle believed the paean,
The paean.
a rhythmic pattern that avoids becoming, a predictable meter. He thought that was the ideal rhythm for prose.
Interesting. So even in something as seemingly technical as prose, he saw an art form.
Recognizing the importance of rhythm and flow in language.
To keep the reader engaged.
Exactly. Aristotle was a master of language, wasn't he? He really understood its power.
To persuade, to evoke emotions, to shape our understanding of the world.
He really did.
Wow, we've covered so much ground today, from the golden mean to political systems to the power of storytelling.
You've been on quite the journey.
But our Aristotelian adventure isn't over yet.
Not even close. Join us for part 3, where we'll bring back our all-star commentators.
To tackle the big questions and see if Aristotle's wisdom still holds up in today's world.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive, folks. We've spent the last 2 episodes exploring Aristotle's universe.
From the structure of the cosmos to the building blocks of reality.
From the intricacies of the soul to the art of persuasion.
We've heard Kanye channeling his inner fire element,
Joe Rogan embracing the golden mean,
Socrates relentlessly questioning everything.
and Nietzsche pushing us to transcend limitations.
It's been quite a ride. But now, it's time to bring it all together.
And answer the big question. Is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics a timeless guide to living well?
Or just a dusty relic of, ancient self-help.
To help us answer that question, let's turn back to our panel of commentators. Kanye, you claim to have achieved peak eudaimonia, Aristotle's concept of flourishing.
Right. What would you say to someone who's struggling to find that sense of fulfillment in their own life?
I bet he'd say something like, listen, Aristotle understood that true happiness comes from pursuing your passions, pushing boundaries, expressing your creativity to the fullest.
That's what eudaimonia is all about.
And that's what I'm living every single day. He'd probably throw in some fashion references and, bold pronouncements.
Oh, definitely. But I think there's a real kernel of wisdom there.
Oh.
Aristotle did emphasized the importance of aligning our actions with our unique talents and values.
He did.
It's not about following a set of rigid rules.
Unconforming to societal expectations.
It's about discovering what truly makes us come alive.
And pursuing it with excellence. Now, Joe Rogan, you seem to resonate with Aristotle's idea of the golden mean.
Right. How do you think that concept can help us navigate the complexities and extremes of modern life?
I can picture Joe leaning back in his chair saying, look, man, Aristotle was all about balance, finding that middle path between extremes. It's not about denying yourself pleasure or living like a monk.
It's about finding a sustainable approach, whether it's diet, exercise, or even your outlook on life. You got to avoid the extremes and find that sweet spot.
That's where you thrive.
Solid advice.
It's about recognizing that excess in any area can be detrimental.
And that true well-being often lies in moderation.
And finding that harmonious balance. All right, Socrates, I know you've been patiently waiting to challenge some of Aristotle's assumptions.
Socrates, what would you say to Aristotle about his views on social hierarchy and the role of the state?
Socrates would probably fix Aristotle with that intense gaze of his and say, Aristotle, you speak of justice and the good life for citizens, but what about those excluded from your ideal society?
The women?
The slaves?
The laborers. Does your concept of justice extend to them?
And if not, how can it truly be called just?
Tough questions.
They expose the limitations of Aristotle's worldview, right?
For sure. He was a product of his time. His ideas reflect the social hierarchies and inequalities that were prevalent in ancient Greece.
Definitely. But Socrates' challenge reminds us that we can't just accept the wisdom of the past uncritically.
Right.
We have to constantly reevaluate those ideas.
In light of our own values.
And strive to create a more just and equitable society.
They're all.
Exactly. And finally, Nietzsche, you've argued that Aristotle played it too safe.
That he overemphasized reason and control at the expense of passion and individual striving.
Right. How do you reconcile your views with Aristotle's emphasis on, virtue and the golden mean?
I'm curious to hear this.
Nietzsche might say, Aristotle's focus on moderation is a recipe for mediocrity. It's a way to keep the masses in check, maintain the status quo.
The true path to greatness lies in embracing our passions, transcending conventional morality.
And in becoming the Übermensch, the one who creates their own values and shapes their own destiny. Always pushing the boundaries, that Nietzsche.
Challenging us to think differently.
But I think his critique also highlights an important point. Aristotle's system isn't meant to be a rigid set of rules, but rather a framework for ethical reflection and self-cultivation.
So it's more of a starting point.
Exactly.
So listeners, after this deep dive, what do you think? Is Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics a timeless guide to living well?
Or is it simply an interesting artifact of a bygone era? We'll leave that for you to decide.
We hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and given you some new perspectives on, how to live a good life.
Whether you agree with Aristotle or not.
Aristotle was a brilliant mind.
Who grappled with some of the biggest questions humanity has ever faced.
And his ideas, they continue to resonate.
And provoke debate.
Even today.
They do.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey through the world of Aristotle.